All right, let's get started. Thank you for joining us for our webinar titled Why Network and Endpoint Security Isn't Enough. Today's program will cover why traditional security measures fail to stop web application and data breaches, how modern best practices safeguard against web application attacks, and what strategies enable scalable data protection and simplified audits. Hi, I'm your host, Stephanie Gilliam, and before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, you'll find multiple application widgets you can use. If you have a question, please submit it using the Q&A widget. The widget is located at the bottom of your console and to the right of your screen. We will try to answer all questions during the session, but if we run out of time, your question will be answered later via email. Additional materials that you might be interested in are available in the Resource List widget that looks like a green folder at the bottom of your console and to the right of your screen. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the Help widget with the question mark icon. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Also look for an email from Imperva on Monday with a link to this recording and the slides. Since time is of the essence, let's welcome in today's speakers, Narayan Makaram and Cheryl O'Neill. Narayan is the Director of Product Marketing for Web Application Security Products at Imperva. He has over 15 years of experience in enterprise security solutions in the areas of application network security, SAM, vulnerability, and threat management. Previously, he has held product marketing, product management, and strategic alliance roles at Tenable, FireEye, ArcSight, and HP. Cheryl is the Director of Product Marketing for Database Security Products at Imperva. She has over 15 years experience in information security and compliance, working with the largest financial services, life science, and Fortune 500 companies to safely secure their most sensitive and regulated data. Now I'd like to turn it over to Narayan to kick things off. Narayan?
Thank you, Stephanie. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Thanks for taking the time to attend this webinar. I'm going to get started, and we're going to talk about why traditional network and endpoint security measures are not enough, and what are the challenges our current customers are facing. Then I'm going to go over the best practices for providing good web application protection. Then Cheryl is going to talk about strategies for data protection, and together we're going to cover other tips to improve your security posture. So please do send in your questions through the Q&A window, and we will answer them towards the end. With that, let's look at the challenges current customers are facing with perimeter network and endpoint security. So infrastructure is basically going through humongous changes in the last 5 to 10 years, and the business risks are moving up the stack, all the way from physical security all the way to users. Physical network and endpoint security alone is not enough to really protect your enterprise. Risks are moving to data, applications, and users, and we will see why. So as companies grow and move to multiple locations, the physical security on sites in remote geographies may not be all secured. As companies expand from single company to connecting to multiple suppliers and partners, the network isolation policies may not be put in place. The case in point is the Target breach, where hackers got in from a HVAC partner to access the point-of-sale machines and deposit malware. Endpoints are no longer issued by the enterprise. People can bring in their own devices, which may have malware because of applications they've downloaded off the internet. Data is rapidly moving from data centers to private and hybrid clouds, so company confidential data may be out in the cloud available for internet users and hackers. Applications are no longer facing the intranet. Applications which provide access to critical data is now available as SaaS applications and available to internet users and hackers. And users themselves may not be trusted because they could be untrusted users over the internet, as well as untrusted users like partners and contractors who are working in your enterprise. So these are the challenges that customers are facing, and so just protecting your physical network endpoint security is not enough. The last line of defense is to really protect your crown jewels, which is data and applications. So let's drill deeper into what are the challenges with protecting users, applications, and data. The key question businesses should be asking for to really provide good security is, where is critical data, first of all? Which applications provide access to critical data? Who can access critical data? Are the applications protected enough to really provide access to only those authorized users who need access? And are we compliant for the major regulations? So here is a data center with a set of applications. They could be internet-facing applications, e-commerce or banking, or they could be intranet-facing applications. And they get to provide access to data, which could be data in databases, structured data, or unstructured data in files. So if you look at external users, customers, partners, employees, and the guy in the orange is a hacker. And on the intranet, there could be careless employees, malicious insiders, and compromised users. The orange guy is a malicious insider. You can see that the next generation firewall IPS IDS have enough holes in them which provide access to web application traffic where one can mount SQL injection attacks, business logic attacks, or brute force attacks using stolen credentials to take over accounts or perform fraud. These are not checked by your existing perimeter controls. On the inside, you have users who may have clicked on, unbeknownst to them, clicked on malicious attachments and they get compromised, or you have malicious insiders who are trying to get at company confidential data. And nobody's really monitoring the usage of data. Really knowing where the critical data is present is also a challenge. Secondly, are we monitoring user right violations? Are we monitoring unauthorized access? These are the challenges which customers are facing as far as data is concerned coming from insider threats. So Cheryl is going to talk about what are the best practices and strategies to really take care of data protection on the inside. And I'm going to talk about how you can use web application security measures to really protect applications which give access to data coming from the outside. With that, let me switch to best practices for web application security. So as you can see in this graph, there are security breaches which are happening through the years in spite of all the security defenses customers have put in place. These numbers are number of data records stolen. From Ashley Madison, what 39 million were stolen. Anthem, 80 million was stolen. And not all of them are a result of web attacks, but a majority of them, about 75% of them, are cyber attacks targeted at web applications. Web applications are used because they're facing the internet. They give you easy access to low-hanging fruit, which is data. On average, about 75% of vulnerabilities exist per web application, and 1 in 5 vulnerabilities allow access to sensitive data. These are numbers put out by Gartner, White Hat, and Internet Threat Report. So according to Ponemons data loss report, the average cost of a security breach is around $5.85 million in 2014, which has gone up from last year. And at least 50% of it can be attributed to web application security failures within enterprises. So we will talk about what are the best practices to really protect your web applications in the next few slides. So here you have a web application firewall which sits in front of the web servers and sits behind a next-generation firewall or IPS-IDS perimeter defense. And you have the IPS-IDS really protecting you with some level of network access control, which you have defined in your IPS-IDS configuration. You have user and application control if the firewall is application aware. And you have some level of intrusion control. But all of the web traffic which is launched by attackers can go through the next generation firewall. Types of attacks being the OWASP top 10 attacks, attacks coming from bad IPs, bad bots, DDoS attacks, and so on, which are layered on HTTP. And any brute force attacks which are as a result of stolen credentials, trying to replay stolen credentials to take over accounts or fraudulent transactions. So what you need as a best practice is the latest level of threat intelligence, which is crowdsourced from all the deployments across the world, as well as from a research organization which can provide you, curate the data and provide you the critical set of signatures and policies which need to be applied on the WAF. And that's precisely what Imperva Threat Radar does. It is a threat intelligence service which can be bought on top of the Imperva web application firewall, and it gives you protection against badly reputed sources of attacks, bot and DDoS protection, account takeover protection, and it gives you connectors to fraud prevention services so you can prevent transactional fraud in the WAF without modifying the web application at the back end. So with this, what you get is legitimate traffic passing through the WAF and a true reduction of the noise coming to the web application. So you don't have to provision web application servers with large capacity because most of the traffic which is related to attacks and bot and DDoS related attacks can be blocked right in the front door of a web application firewall. So let's look at the defenses a true web application firewall should provide to not only take care of the technical attacks which can be launched to really exploit the vulnerabilities in application, but all the way to business logic attacks. So you definitely need a set of attack signatures which are up to date. You need a level of HTTP protocol validation, so that way no exploits happen at the HTTP layer. Cookie protection to protect against hijacked tokens and cookies. And device dynamic profiling is a key feature where you can automatically set up limitations on parameters to the application interfaces. So to really examine the application, identifying which parameters need to be of what size and how many parameters should be sent. So these are all to prevent SQL injection attacks into the application. Then on top of that, you need some sort of intelligence to really understand blacklists of IPs, any site scraping clients which are attacking your website to kind of remove information and reuse, and an engine which can really determine the difference between a good bot as well as a bad bot, so it can really prevent any bad bots from launching automated attacks. On top of that, you would need some level of locating IPs by geolocation. So if there's a mismatch, you need to flag them. A way of really looking at credential intelligence to see if the credentials are stolen for replay. A level of device intelligence to see if the device has committed fraud before, and a set of fraud connectors. So this is a complete set of intelligence engines which you need running on top of a WAF to provide true level of protection. And on top of that, some level of correlation to reduce the number of false positives, a way of virtually patching an application in the WAF, so even if the application vulnerability exists, it cannot be misused because that type of exploits can be blocked in the WAF layer. And then a level of DDoS protection on top of that using DDoS intelligence we get from our product called Incapsula. So let's see what is truly provided by a next generation firewall or IPS. If you look at it, almost 80% of it is grayed out, and the type of protection you get are truly attack signatures. They do have a set of attack signatures which is constantly updated, but they focus on non-HTTP attacks and maybe some level of URL string matching. There's a level of protocol validation provided, blacklist of IP reputation and IP geolocation is provided, but the rest of it is not really available. A next-generation firewall is not a purpose-built platform for web application attacks like a WAF is. So in addition, if you drill deeper, the SecureSphere WAF provides you multiple levels of protection and correlation across these levels of protection. So apart from the base features which is available in the WAF, which is protocol validation, attack signatures, and application profiling, a customer can subscribe to threat intelligence from Threat Radar, which gives you reputation protection, bot protection, and account takeover protection. With this, the benefit you gain is a reduced set of threats hitting your web application firewall. The amount of traffic hitting your web application firewall is far reduced, so the load on the WAF is reduced. With correlation, you get an increased level of accuracy of detection. The number of alerts the SOC sees is far lesser than you would see if the web application was running right behind the next generation firewall. And improved user protection, because you would have users protected from account takeover attacks. So that level of protection truly gives you an access where legitimate users would be logging into your web application. And your WAF also should be capable of being deployed in multiple scenarios based on your needs. A WAF typically is deployed on-prem in front of the web server, and it should have a capability to really protect multiple web servers at a time. The WAF should also be available as a virtual image on a cloud-based data center like AWS. And we are releasing an Azure version fairly soon, Q1 of next year. And then you should have a way to really have a cloud-based WAF which does not have any footprint in the data center, in the cloud, or on-prem. So that is our Incapsula WAF, which not only provides web application protection, but it also provides CDN services as well as DDoS services in the cloud itself. And it's a managed service offered by Imperva. So as you can see in the Gartner's Magic Quadrant for Web Application Firewalls, Imperva's WAF has been the only vendor in the leader quadrant for the last 2 years. And we have been constantly innovating and improving the WAF within the last year itself, with the latest feature, account takeover, being released in 11.5 in September. So with that, I will transfer control to Cheryl, who's going to talk about data protection strategies for the enterprise. Cheryl?
Great. Thank you, Narayan. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. As Narayan mentioned, I'm going to talk about data protection strategies and ways SecureSphere can help you with that. The The world of database auditing and protection is a complex subject. We have multiple stakeholders. We have multiple objectives. Is there PCI requirements? Are there security requirements? Where do those things overlap? And this is kind of where, when you start digging into these projects, you find out that there's a set of must-dos and a set of should-dos. And where the overlap is those, it really drives, that regulation drives the true overlap there. And so the regulation takes care of a certain amount of data, but then there's a whole nother set of data that is not covered by regulations. And this is what we see often in these data breaches that Narayan mentioned. Obviously, the data and a lot of the information that was in the some of the breaches earlier this spring, kind of high-profile ones, was not regulated data, and yet it was extremely embarrassing and had very large repercussions. So what we want to do is we want to look at that information and say, even though it's not regulated, is there a need to protect it? And this is the must-do versus the should-dos. Do we look at the addresses, the names, passwords, intellectual property, phone numbers, salaries, etc.? Okay. When we do this, we find out that data audit and protection is a cross-departmental function. Each group has historically looked at this from a silo perspective. We had the IT and audit and risk guys looking at data from one perspective, and then we had the security team looking at it from another perspective. And yet again, we had the application developers guys coming at it from another direction, and of course the DBAs are a whole other story. So when we look at this, we start seeing that there's overlaps in the requirements, and we break it down into a set of, clear categories. Is it risk and legal? Is it IT? Or is it the line of business? And then we start taking a look at the use cases: sensitive data auditing, data theft protection, data across borders. So when we go into an organization and start talking to them, we might start talking with these groups, and then we might start talking these use cases. But what happens is we drive to a common set of requirements. We have to assess and manage the risk, and there's a best practices for that. We have to manage users. Users are our most at-risk element. We've done a really good job of looking at our applications and securing those. We've done a really good job of looking at our firewalls and our devices, and we're doing a pretty good job of looking at some of our data. But when we have those compromised users, those careless users, or even those malicious users, they have the access rights to get into this data. And how are we going to protect ourselves? This is where audit and reporting comes in. And then, as a result of a lot of the things we saw this spring and last holiday season, we've seen the security and attack protection become a higher priority within these organizations. What was it? The release of our health data? Was it the release of our dating profile information? What was it that started pushing this up in people's profile? Maybe it's just the cumulative effect, versus the straw that broke the camel's back. But this is definitely rising in people's priorities. And so what we want to do is take a look at the life cycle and map this to a process that it becomes repeatable within your organization. How can you take this set of requirements, map it to a set of processes that apply, and all user groups or stakeholders can get behind and support? Because we all know that if multiple departments and multiple teams get behind a project, its ability to gain budget and sustainable budget increases, and of course that means more resources across the board, and you get more things done. It doesn't become a siloed application that's gets used for a few years and then goes on the shelf. So let's take a look at this life cycle. We have a discovery component, an assessment component. So then we're going to set some controls. We're going to do some auditing and security, and then we're going to measure and report, and then we're going to feed that back into the process. And this is dynamic. So this is not something you pull off the shelf once a year. This is something that happens real time. This is how the process works. Security has to be dynamic. We have to respond. And this is where automation really helps, because if something happens, how quickly can you react? Having those tools in place that can capture that information, measure it, apply the risk, and put controls in place immediately are an essential part of reducing your risk profile. So let's take a look at the prioritization and classification of your risk. One of the first things you have to do, and you must not under prioritize this or underfund this aspect, discovery. You have to know the data that's at risk, and to do that, you have to know where it's at. You have to locate the databases. Then you have to classify the sensitive information by policy and BU, etc. And you then have to take those policies and take and apply policies. And you want that done automatically. What you don't want to have happen is you go out and discover a set of databases, and then you spend weeks trying to figure out what policies need to be applicable there. You need a tool that'll go in and look at that database, figure out very, very quickly what's in there, and auto-apply a series of policies to put in at least a baseline set of protections and policies. And that's where the classification, then you can move into the classification. You can start to fine-tune it, and you can apply different types of policies and rules. But initially, right off the bat, you want to get that default set of controls in place so you have at least some level of risk protection. When we saw some of the big breaches from the healthcare systems earlier this year, those companies did have some level of protection over certain aspects of their data, but not all. And again, your audit and protection only works if it's applied to the data that the hacker's after. If he sees one set of data, or she sees, I shouldn't be gender biased here, if he sees one set of data that's protected and one set of data that's not protected, let me think about this. Which of those is he going to go after? Is he going to spend his time trying to break into something when he can go get almost the exact same data out of a database that's not protected? So it's important that you discover those rogue databases, those unknown unknowns, find those things, and put in place those controls. What that does is it lets you stop the theft before it happens. You need to go in and protect your data so that as activity is going on, you know what's abnormal. You have dynamic profiling that's in place that can say, this is an anomalous behavior. And with SecureFear, this is enriched through integrations with other tools and other systems. So, for example, if I have an audit come through and it says, oh, this nurse is, we can see from our LDAP integration that she's a nurse, is accessing health data records. Well, that looks great. But because of our other integrations and our data enrichment, we can see that she's a nurse in the maternity ward, and she just looked up the health data for some gentleman that's got a broken leg in an emergency room. That's inappropriate. And now we can flag that because we had that enriched data, and we know that it goes above and beyond that user's rights or what that person should be doing. And between the dynamic profiling and the enrichment of the data from other sources, we know that that's a violation. We can alert and block on it. On the blocking front, you can quarantine the request and stop and just hold it. Or you can actually block that activity, not the user, but the actual transaction. And what that means is if you're using a system ID, that individual transaction can be quarantined or blocked without taking down the actual application, which is an essential portion of any large company's enterprise organization. We have two-way integration with malware tools, so F5. They can update our policies, and we can push those things out very rapidly through an API set so that we can collaborate and move this information through your security infrastructure very, very quickly. You're not reliant upon people to keep track of every little bug that's out there and then manually update your policies. This information can be fed back in through your infrastructure. Works the same way with our WAF correlation with what the tools Narayan was talking about. We have that correlation. We have that universal user tracking where we can track users as they move through the system. As I mentioned, system users. With a lot of times when your user logs in and they do a system request, how do you translate that user from that system request? And this gets into the blocking and knowing when to stop the data. Sometimes you just want to watch the data. We had a company with some PCI compliance policies in place, and they were just policies in place for compliance reasons. And they started seeing some alerts come through that say, hey, we got some compliance policies here. So they started watching that and seeing what was going on, and then they applied some security policies, and they actually started quarantine, and then they were able to backtrack the IP addresses, provide that information to the FBI, who went out and then was able to arrest and subsequently prosecute that. So that was the type of, here is where the should do or the must do's, the compliance requirements overlapped with the security, and they took that extra step to put in security policies above and beyond their compliance policies that was able to provide the authorities with the information they needed to go, and track down the perpetrator and prosecute them. So all of the records was there, and obviously subsequently they put in place the rules to actually block that activity. They obviously put in some tools so that the real data wasn't stolen, so don't worry about that. That was certainly part of the incident response program. So that's just an example of how that must do and that should do can overlap. And with SecureSphere, that makes it's very easy because a lot of solutions like Native Audit and some of the other tools out on the market require that you actually audit the data or the activity before you can monitor for security reasons. With SecureSphere, that's not the case. We can actually separate our compliance policy monitoring from our security policy monitoring. What that means is you can monitor an extremely large amount of activity for security policy violations without actually auditing, subjecting that information to compliance policy monitoring and an auditing. And of course, the difference being monitoring is I just look at it for violations. Auditing means I look at it and I write that to a log somewhere that I can subsequently print out, PCI compliance logs, SOX log reporting, and I can provide that information to an auditor. Where with a security system, your auditor doesn't care how many people did, requests and logs into your databases. That may not be in their scope of their compliance. But certainly from a SOX perspective, you want to know who accessed your financial data and what they did with it, so that's an audit requirement. Okay. So we're going to simplify the compliance side of this. Now we have these audit policies in place, and they're capturing all of this information, and they're putting it into logs. Well, you say, wow, I've got native audit logs, and they're a pain in the butt to work with. I have to dump it into my tools and massage it, and, it just takes me days and days and days, and I have to bring PwC in, and they love it, but it's kind of expensive. Well, we take care of that. We're going to provide you with over 350 out-of-the-box reports, and there's out-of-the-box policies, so you don't have to be a subject matter in every single compliance regulations that your company may be subjected to, nor do you have to worry about the overlap of those things. We have compliance people on staff that have looked at those and say we can apply these, and we actually apply these policies independently. So some of the tools out there will make you apply your policies sequentially, and you'll have to set up your rules. Kind of, if you go back to junior high when you were doing your order of operations with math and algebra, you were working through your order of operations. Now that's essentially what you're going to have to do with some of these other tools on the market, is you're going to have to get your order of operations right. And that means you have to prioritize your compliance requirements and your security requirements, because once they trigger on one, they don't keep going necessarily. So you have to be very, very careful with that. With SecureSphere, we're going to execute each of these things independently so that they get executed, and you're going to know every policy that gets violated. Now, that information can be summarized and simplified if you're sending it off to a SIM so that you don't get 1,000 alerts on the same activity. But this is the type of information that's provided out of the box, saving thousands and thousands of hours a year in manual effort. The reports come out. They're point-and-click reports. If you're familiar with report writing tools, they're even simpler than that. It's very simple, straightforward compliance reporting. You need a PCI report, you go out and pull a PCI report. You need a SOX report, you pull a SOX report. You need JSOX, you get the idea. All right. So what does it look like when it's deployed into your organization? Well, there's different ways to deploy the solution. There are three main components. There's an agent that is optionally deployed at the database level, which is on the right here on our chart. Then you're going to have a gateway. This is if you will, the collector. And this is what's going to talk to those agents, or it's going to be the tool that monitors the network traffic if you're going to do network monitoring. And there's different modes of doing that, sniffing and bridging. So you can be in line or out of line. And, and these are the things that your professional service organization can help you work through, is what's going to be best for your organization and your situation. And then there's a management server that sits up above all of this. And if you're a very large enterprise, then there's another tier of management that can be used. And how it works is your users are going to be absolutely, it's totally transparent to them. They're going to do their thing. And, their applications are going to work just like normal. The database administrators aren't going to be overly upset with your agents, because unlike native audit that has a horrendous impact on your database server, the agents, when they're deployed on the database, have a very minimal impact, typically between 2 and 3%. It's not going to have a large impact on your network, because we utilize a flat file mechanism that can write tremendously fast, very, very fast, extremely scalable. And so this solution can grow very, very large implementations, and it can be deployed very, very quickly, because we have an API set that is fully integrated and works with your IT deployment services. As Narayan mentioned, we are AWS cloud enabled and are looking for an Azure solution in the next year. So you get a flexible deployment model, fully transparent, rapid deployment, high availability. There's clustering available. This can be deployed either as physical appliances or virtual. There are multiple agent modes, so agent spanning and bridge. We have a very broad set of coverage, including big data, and there's tremendous amount of out-of-the-box content. When I was at a recent user forum, around the table we were talking to a large set of customer base across the full spectrum, everything from government, Fortune 100 companies down to smaller SMB style. And without exception, every single one of them had talked about the problems of getting and keeping people that understood security and how to apply it. And this is where this out-of-the-box content can help, because it helps you with resources. You don't have to have that super skilled person in every single mode of everything, and you don't have to hire professional services, because this information comes out of the box and you don't have to develop it. Okay. So recently I was talking to Ross Bovenmeyer from Republic Bank Corp in Kentucky, and this was just a quote he gave me, and there was a little bit after this, but I mean this was tremendous to hear. 100% uptime over a 3-year period. I mean, the SLA on that is just fantastic. And he was talking about his managed risk profile and how he approached his board and how he went through the process of reducing the bank's risk profile by putting in SecureSphere, replacing another legacy system. And they're very happy and they're very comfortable with where they're at on the risk profile these days. Okay. With that, I want to turn it back over to Narayan, and we'll go through the tips for improving your overall security posture. Narayan?
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you. So I'm going to cover the left half of the slide and basically recap by saying network endpoint defenses alone is not enough. The last line of defense is data and application security. So with web application security, these are the tips we advise, recommend to customers, and hear back from customers. So deploying a WAF in front of every external-facing web application which gives you access to critical data is absolutely necessary. And embellishing that WAF with the latest threat intelligence so you can go after the advanced attacks which are constantly evolving is really critical. So subscribing to reputation intelligence, account takeover intelligence, device intelligence, and so on is critical to keep the WAF up to date. And fostering a set of secure web development practices if you're developing web applications in-house is also very critical. And beyond that, running vulnerability scans on these web applications so you know where the holes are so they can be patched to the WAF level is also important. That's where the lag time between a vulnerability which is introduced into application to a actual patch of the application is in the order of weeks, and that gives a long window for the hackers to compromise and get at critical data. I think scheduling and integrating with vulnerability scanners and SIM, so you get a better visibility into what's happening at the application and data tiers, as well as with vulnerability scanners, so you can get vulnerability data, is also very critical. And finally, making sure that your WAF can be deployed in flexible modes, in a layer 2 bridge mode versus a reverse proxy mode versus on-premise or in the cloud, is something which you should make sure, because your applications can migrate from on-premise to a cloud-based data center as you evolve. So Cheryl?
Great. Thank you, Narayan. But just to reiterate some of the data security tips we would have for you, have a plan. Know what you're after. Know what the results you need. This can save you a lot of time. If you know you're going to need something, make sure the tool you choose can deliver that in a repeatable, scalable process. If you're looking at an initial rollout of 50 databases, but you're going to need to move to 1,500, 2,000 databases over a geographically dispersed area, you're going to need to apply PCI compliance on a subset of those, and they're in different flavors of databases. Make sure the tool that you can do that on can deploy the policies in a logical manner, run the scans in a logical manner, and then you can run the tests and policies in an efficient manner, which actually will deliver the results you need. Know and classify your data. You cannot underestimate this, because it doesn't matter how great the security on database A is if you don't have security on database B because you didn't know about it and you didn't know there was sensitive data in there, if the hacker comes in, they're going to ignore your database A and they're going to go after the unprotected one. So know and protect your data. Again, this comes down to the should do's versus the must do sometimes. But you need to understand what your risk profile is, and having a risk-based profile versus a compliance-based profile management can make a very large difference when we start talking about security. Implement a universal platform and policies. You're going to, most organizations don't have don't have a single flavor of database. Even if they do run just Oracle, they're going to run different versions of Oracle. Rolling up the information out of multiple versions of databases, multiple flavors of databases across different geographical regions, how are you going to pull all that information together? How are you going to apply policies consistently across those policies? With SecureSphere, you have a very easy-to-use report policy writer. Most of it comes out of the box, and you just, drag and drop what you want to change or fill in it's kind of a multi-choice type thing. Very easy to update and apply, and it applies across all platforms, including big data. For those of you looking at big data solutions, if you think about how would you write a script to go into those native tools to apply a PCI policy to them? Do you have the knowledge of going into, HDFS or Hive and these other elements in MongoDB and writing policies that will be applicable there? They are subject to the same compliance requirements as databases, and obviously, the hackers are going to go after them, sooner or later. I don't think we've had a big data breach on those yet, but it's just a matter of time. Audit what matters and don't audit what doesn't. Monitor for security purposes, but don't audit what if you're monitoring it for security purposes, great, but you don't necessarily have to audit that data. Make the distinction of, why am I looking at this data? Am I doing it for security purposes or audit purposes? Because there can be a tremendous difference. If you have a large organization with a high transaction database and you try to audit all the data like you would have to with a native solution or some of the other products on the market, that's going to add up very, very quickly. And you can think about the audit logs you'd have, how much disk space is that going to take, how much rack space, how much cooling cost, your total cost of ownership starts to go up. So audit what you need and monitor other things. Separate the two. And constantly think security. When was the last time you actually tested it? Have you done a pen test on this? Have you gone through and really looked at what's going on? Have you gone in and done, forensic analysis? Have you tried to investigate something that's going on? It's always good to go through and test it so that if something actually does happen, your people know what they're doing, they know how to go about it, and it's going to work. And you're not going to be trying to fix something, in the heat of the moment. And look to the future. What are your scaling needs? How big are you going to need to scale? What cloud environments are you going to adopt? What's your big data plan? Everybody's going to have some form of big data. What's your risk exposure on that, and what do you intend to do to that? And there's other things that you might want to look at beyond that. But this is kind of our top tips for the day, and I hope you've enjoyed our session. I believe we're going to open it up for QA, so I will turn it back over to Stephanie, and Narayan and I will do our best to answer your questions. Stephanie, do you want to talk to them about how to do Q&A again, and then I'll actually put the questions to Narayan and myself?
Of course. So as a reminder, if you have a question, please submit it using the Q&A widget. The widget is located at the bottom of your console and to the right of your screen, and we will do the best to get through everyone's questions.
Okay, the first question is, does our product have a built-in template for regulatory reports? And absolutely, yes it does. I haven't checked the latest review and actually counted them, but the last time I went out there was over 350 dedicated reports out there. So if you had one in specific you were interested in, then we could go look it up, but that we definitely have out-of-the-box reports. Our next question, let me see if I can read this one here. Where do you see the greatest security gaps? Narayan, why don't you start, take point on that one, and I'll come in behind and see if there's anything I want to add from a data-centric perspective.
Yeah, so we see that having tools is not good enough. You need to have security operations really focused on which are the business-critical applications which are hosting data. So that's what you need to protect first. So having an idea of discovering the type of applications which are giving you access to critical data, which are externally facing, is very important. And beyond that, having a level of penetration testing or vulnerability analysis to see which of these applications have vulnerabilities. So many customers don't have an idea, especially if the application is outsourced to some other party to develop. They have no clue as to how many vulnerabilities exist in these applications. So having these two pieces of information helps them decide where to put the WAF, what sort of virtual patching they need to do in the WAF because they can't modify the application because they don't own the application. And beyond that, subscribing to threat intelligence, which really arms the WAF with the latest set of signatures. So some people install a WAF, and the gap I see is they don't subscribe to the threat intelligence to really arm it with the latest set of signatures and policies. So that way they don't have to be constantly monitoring the applications. We, as our application research finds new threats, we arm the WAF automatically and take care of it on your behalf. So those are the three things I would say are gaps which we see in customers who are using WAFs.
Great. Okay. Do you require agents to monitor databases? The question goes on to ask again about the performance hit. So yes, we can deploy agents on the database, or as I mentioned, we also have a network monitoring that can be inline or bridge mode, and we have materials on that go into that in more detail. The agent mode definitely gives you a greater level of control, especially from privileged users. So if you have a network-based mode, it's going to monitor the activity that's going back and forth along the network. However, if you've got a privileged user sitting in your data center, whether that's the back office or it's an actual data center somewhere, and he pops off the network cable and he sits down and he pulls out his little SQL tool and he starts writing commands to download records to a flash drive, that he slides right into the server. That network monitoring wouldn't see that activity because it's no longer transversing over the network. It's actually happening on the local machine. And that's where the network agent can capture that information. Another situation is, a lot of times, if an actual database goes dark and it goes down, you want to know the very last thing that happened on that database. It's kind of like, going to the back of a mystery novel and looking at the last page to see what happened. You want to know what's going on. And that's where that local agent can help you, because it will track the traffic up right to the moment of, darkness. Where network monitoring may not pick that up. But there are advantages in situations where network-based monitoring is definitely the preferred choice. This is where you talk to a professional. They can go into your situation, talk to you about what your objectives are, what your situation is, what your transactions per section are, and decide what's going to work best for you. And again, that performance hit, it's 2 to 3% typically, and compared to a native audit, which can, depending on what you're doing, can reach, 20% or higher. And that's straight out of the documentation of the vendors. Okay. All right, let's look at this next one. You mentioned compromised and privileged users. Can you talk about them more? Narayan, why don't you take point on that one and see what, talk about to that a little bit from the WAF perspective.
So from the external threats perspective, we can't really differentiate compromised versus privileged users. We just look at the activity and threats based on that behavior. We can decide, okay, is it a compromised user coming in from a man-in-the-browser attack over the internet, and see the activity following that, look at the HTTP headers, look at what sort of information is he accessing, and based on our policies which we have, we would be able to detect if it's a compromised user trying to use an account with stolen credentials. And we have a repository of stolen credentials which we can check against and decide, okay, this is somebody who doesn't normally log in from this geolocation and is trying to log in using this account which doesn't belong to him, and he's using stolen credentials. And from there, we can determine if it is a compromised user who's trying to attack a web application.
Okay. From the database side, we're using the same platform, the same core platform logic as the WAF is, and it's very similar. We look at what's typically done from a data perspective. We decide if this is normal, should that person, like the use case I mentioned earlier, where the maternity nurse was looking up something in the emergency room. We detected that because we understood the user's behavior, and we understood we had the information from the external systems to know that a maternity nurse should not be looking up emergency room data. So, that's where you can put out those and flags and say, this is wrong, that privileged user is doing something wrong. As Narayan mentioned, if it's compromised, we can look at the IP addresses, the geolocation, and other things to say, this isn't right, and you can take steps to quarantine, stop, block, or just alert on those materials. I am conscious of the time. We are running late, so I want to leave a few minutes for Stephanie. So if you've submitted questions and we haven't got to them, we will try to address them offline. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Stephanie?
All right, very good. So thank you, Narayan and Cheryl, and this concludes today's Imperva webinar. We, of course, want to extend our appreciation to all of you for taking the time out of your schedules to be with us today. If you're interested in learning more about our solutions, we invite you to join one of our technical deep dive demos offered every Tuesday. The 30-minute live demos take an inside look at the nuts and bolts of Imperva product capabilities and end with a Q&A session with one of our security experts. To learn more about these weekly demos, visit imperva.com/go/tech demo. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.